Hello, everybody. Welcome into the cycle. I am Ryan Wormeli, joined as always by Mike Maher. We are talking a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to talk some pitchers. We're going to talk some buy lows and sell highs. Those will be in some of the later segments that you can find on YouTube and on audio. We're going to start things off with rounding the bases as always. Before we dive into some of the trending topics around the league, Maher, how are you doing? Now that we're like a couple weeks in, because like that first week, it's okay. It can be kind of a fluke. You never know. It's really small sample size. A couple weeks in, how are your teams looking for the 2025 fantasy season?
It's kind of a mixed bag of everything. There's a couple leagues I'm doing really well. There's at least one league I'm doing really poorly. And the other few, I'm like average to above average. But, across I think I'm in 8 leagues. I'm doing fairly well in most of them. Maybe one or two, I got some work to do. I'm in trouble, especially one that we're in together. I'm near the bottom. It's my hitting that's really holding me back. I do have some players coming back that can help me soon, but it's not looking great right now.
I was going to say, you and I are in 2 leagues together, and I am performing very well in both of them. They are probably the 2 best leagues I am in this year. I have other leagues where I'm not doing so hot, including the FantasyPros, in-house work league. I'm in dead last, so that's
Are you in dead last? Me, you, and Kelly were like the top 3 performing teams last week, weren't we?
Yeah, my first 2 weeks were first of all, they counted the first half week as a full week, and I just had a bad 3 days, and so that hurt me because it's a categories league. So I went 1-9 or something.
The league ends in May, so you got to count that first week.
Yeah, and I had a very poor second week. I had a good third week, but there's only so much you can bounce back. So. A lot of work to do in that one, but let's dive into some of the stuff going on around baseball. I put in. You told me before we started recording that you don't really have a strong, take on this situation, but we have to just mention Spencer Strider finally returning. This is a guy who, prior to getting hurt, was the as consensus of an SP1 as you can get in fantasy baseball. Really no red flags at all. Just an elite fantasy ace. And Strider went 5 innings, 2 runs, 1 walk, 5 strikeouts, gave up a home run. He threw 97 pitches in his first outing back. Obviously, he had a couple rehab starts in there to build up the workload. But this is over a year since we last saw him, and he looked like a not too far off version of Spencer Strider. What was your kind of takeaway from watching that or checking the box score?
Yeah, well, my first take was I actually tweeted about it, how annoyed I am, because I live in Georgia where I should be able to watch the Braves. But they are not on local television because of a contract dispute, but then also blacked out on MLB TV. So the Braves are the one team I can't watch live, so I had to watch his back. I know some people were out there, they were a little concerned the velocity was down a mile per hour. I thought he looked fine. Obviously he didn't look like the elite version of Spencer Strider, but I thought this is what a first start back looks like for a good pitcher. They don't always come out and throw 8 shutout innings. Sometimes you go out there, you throw 5 innings, you don't have your best stuff, and it's fine. He didn't get rocked, he didn't look amazing. I don't think the velocity was down enough that it's concerning, because he still got a few fastballs up over 97 miles an hour. I think that's going to be just fine. I think, even if that's where he sits most of the season, I think he'll be okay at that. It's not like he's, he threw 93, 94, now he's down at 91 where it could be a problem, which is kind of funny to say that now because in the 90s, you'd be like, wow, 91, that's great. But yeah, I know some people are a little worried. I'm not that worried. I think he looked fine.
So I guess the real question is, how many pitchers would you rather have than him rest of the season? If the season started today, you're presuming you have him for the quote-unquote whole year, the rest of the way going forward. Where is he? I mean, I'll tell you in ECR and rest of season rankings, which isn't always updated that quickly, but for what it's worth, he's at starting pitcher 13. Actually, it's 12 because Ohtani's ahead of him just because of the way the rankings look. But obviously, Ohtani we're not looking at as a pitcher. So really, the 12th highest ranked pitcher rest of season. There are definitely names ahead of him that I would rather have him than. The names immediately ahead of him are Michael King, Corbin Burnes, Dylan Cease, Jacob deGrom. I'd rather have him than maybe all of those guys. Cease is maybe the one that I would think about, but I'd definitely rather have Strider than Corbin Burnes from what we've seen. I think Strider's less of an injury risk than Jacob deGrom, and Michael King has had some good, some bad. But I'm pretty sure I'd rather have Strider as like that SP 8-ish range. Is what first jumps out to me. What do you think about that?
In my rankings, I moved him up to SP5. So SP6,
okay.
if you include Ohtani, but SP5, I only have Skeens, Skubal, Crochet, and Wheeler ahead of him, and then I have Strider, and then the rest of the list.
So,
I moved him up.
So I think that's fair. The one name that is ahead of like even Crochet that you didn't mention is Logan Gilbert in ECR. That's
who I have next.
Fourth. Okay, so you have him right after Strider. Okay, yeah. I think that Sale and Reagan's like it's worth thinking about more. I think I'd probably rather have Reagan's than Strider, but I totally get the case for reversing those. I think that's like the tier I'd have him in. And I imagine that ECR will move up with Strider, like once we see a couple more starts under his belt. Because I know you mentioned the velocity, but like I'm pretty thoroughly unconcerned about what we saw. What about? I'll just ask you one last thing on him. Is he somebody that you would be looking to include in trades? Either are you worried about some kind of injury and you want to sell him? It sounds like no, based on where you're ranking him. Or would you be saying like, hey, let's make an offer for him as if he is an ace, like actually pay up, buy high to get him in your roster?
So I think about this a lot with like a player, because you obviously, if you have Spencer Strider, you probably drafted him and waited, and now you're happy because he's here. So do you want to just get rid of him already? I think the answer is only if it's a sell high, like because a lot of times, like a player that was hurt, he like comes back, you start getting trade offers like pretty much immediately, and you're like, hold on, Bucko, like I'm the one who drafted this guy and stashed him, like I'm gonna reap the benefits now. You're not gonna trade for him. I'd be willing to sell high because, there's always, with any pitcher, there's injury concern. And especially coming off of Tommy John surgery, the thing that's most likely to happen coming off of Tommy John surgery is getting Tommy John surgery again. So there's always, concern there. But yeah, it would have to be a sell high for me, because for me, I invested in him, I drafted him. And I think a lot of people were worried that, he might not return until like May or June. But then, as we started getting into fantasy draft season, we start to see, hey, this guy's throwing off a mound already. And we started to think, hey, this guy might be back by mid-April. And that's exactly what happened. And so you probably got a pretty good discount on him, depending on like when you drafted, because he's already back. So yeah, I'm definitely holding. But, if you want to, make me a Godfather offer, or, I'll listen.
By the way, just because I'm looking, the name right after him currently in ECR is Yamamoto. I think he should be higher too. Like I would rather have Yamamoto than like from what we've seen from Corbin Burnes. I couldn't have been more out on Jacob deGrom in draft season. I would rather have Yamamoto than him. Just total lack of trust there. Also, not like he's been stellar to start the year anyway. Even aside from the injury stuff, like so I think Yamamoto is another guy that should move up a handful of spots as well, in my opinion. I want to remind everybody that if you want a chance to win a signed Nico Horner Cubs jersey for free, courtesy of our friends at pristineauction.com, all you have to do is subscribe to the FantasyPros MLB YouTube channel right now, drop a comment below on any video, and that is it. We will be announcing a winner right here on the podcast, so make sure to turn on those notifications so you can know when new videos are up and to claim your prize. All right, Maher. I want to look at an article on ESPN.com where they did their ace rankings. This was a few days ago, but it was since our last episode of recording. And I just kind of wanted to run through the list and see what you thought. Obviously, this is more just general ace discussion than, specifically fantasy driven. But, obviously the best pitchers in one are probably going to be near the top of the best pitchers in the other. And since we kind of started off talking about Strider, I wanted to kind of take a step back and evaluate. In the last 5 years, there's been a lot of changeover of who the true aces in baseball are. So I think it's an interesting time to kind of reevaluate, reset, and say who are, the guys at the top. So in this ESPN article, which, anybody can just go Google it, they have number 1, Skubal. Hard to deny that, coming off AL Cy Young. Number 2, Paul Skeens. Obviously, like, aggressive given how little experience he is, but hard to watch him and disagree with him as that being too high. Zach Wheeler, the elder statesman here, almost 35 years old. And not the strongest start to his year, like the last couple outings, but obviously we still have a lot of faith in him. Garrett Crochet at 4, Chris Sale at 5, and then Framber at 6. So the list goes deeper, but that's their tier 1, the slam dunk aces. I'm guessing you will largely agree with the top 5. Obviously, Sale just has kind of the question of like health, but he's coming off the Cy Young, like was awesome last year. So I think those top 5 are pretty valid. Framber, I did not expect to see as a tier 1 ace. What did you think about that?
Yeah, that's a name that jumps out. I think, my first thought was like maybe you can argue against Sale, but I was like, well, he did just win the Cy Young. So as much as I want to like kind of fade him this year, hard to deny how he bounced back with the Braves last year. But yeah, Framber Valdez, like he's a really good pitcher, but I don't know if he belongs in that like tier 1 like ace, conversation, especially because I don't want to kind of like, speak out against like his style of pitching because, there was some really good pitchers in history who, like relied on contact, and he's not like even that extreme, but like we don't think of him as like being like super dominant with like huge strikeout numbers. He's just like a really, really good pitcher. And I would say he is an ace. But to have him this high above some of the other names on the list, I think is a little interesting, especially even if you wanted to have him at like 6 after a tier break, we would have like more of an argument, but to include him in this top tier, I think is pretty.
Do you think he definitely belongs even in the top 12? Like I think it's fair to call him an ace. Like he is capable of being a team's best pitcher, but I might get to 12 names before I came up with him if I was sitting down and saying like thinking true real world, like these are like the aces, like let alone tier 1. But this list only goes 12 deep, which is why I use that number. I'm not sure I would have expected to see him on the list, even if he still would be inside the top, 20 or 25 or whatever would get you in the range of like still an ace, but not like a slam dunk tier 1 type of guy.
I think he belongs in the list a lot more than one of the other pitchers on this list. I can tell you that.
I wonder if we agree on who that other pitcher is. Let's look at some more of the rest of the list in tier 2. And this is just labeled as the second tier aces. At number 7, Cole Reagans. Number 8, Logan Gilbert. Number 9, Corbin Burnes. Number 10, Dylan Cease. Number 11, Christopher Sanchez. And number 12, Spencer Strider. Maher, I wonder which name it is that you think doesn't belong.
I think we're getting a little ahead of our skis on this Christopher Sanchez love to include him in this ace conversation. Like he's been a nice story. He's been really good. I don't know that he belongs like not even on the list ahead of Spencer Strider. Like what are we doing here?
And on some of the other names who aren't on the list, like
yeah,
some of the guys on here, like Strider and Sale, have injury risks. So if you're willing to set aside injury risk, I think Hunter Green should be on there ahead of him. I just mentioned Yamamoto on the fantasy side. I think I would certainly take ahead of Christopher Sanchez. I mean, I think you make cases for some of these other guys that didn't make the list, like Fried, Michael King, Kirby, Schwellenbach, Logan Webb, even. Like, I mean, Garrett Cole's out for the year. They mention him in the kind of honorable mention, but yeah, Sanchez was like Framber was like an eyebrow raiser in tier 1. Sanchez is like an eye opener on this list at all.
Yeah, I think Schwellenbach's an interesting case just because like he's had, in terms of like timeline and performance, he's had kind of like this same rise as Christopher Sanchez, just better. And so like I don't know how you include Christopher Sanchez based on that track record and not Spencer Schwellenbach.
Yeah, that was surprising. Anybody that you would want to make the case for being higher? Because we talked about a couple of the names that we thought were maybe, a little too high and should be lower. Who would you raise on this list? I mean, Strider is like kind of an obvious one because the only reason he's 12th is because of the injury stuff. Is anybody else? I mean, Reagans, I wonder if he's more of like a fantasy ace than a real life ace, but I'm actually not sure. My thought process in even saying that, like he is really good. Who think you should be higher?
I think you could flip Logan Gilbert and Framber Valdez, and I'd be okay with that. Yeah,
I'd agree with that too, for sure. Corbin Burnes. We'll move on after this. I just thought it was kind of an interesting article and wanted to get your opinion. But Burnes is the one. What do you make of him for fantasy purposes moving forward? Because his stuff has gotten worse the last few years. It hasn't mattered. He's still been a very productive fantasy pitcher. now the first year in Arizona, like off to another slow start. He's on the wrong side of 30. This article mentions that his cutter velocity is starting to slip. I watched a lot of him, obviously, last year, like, when he was on the Orioles, and it felt like he wasn't as good as, like, Cy Young winner in Milwaukee, Corbin Burnes, but he was still, like, clearly an ace. I wonder if we're just, like, trending in the wrong direction with him. Like, when you think about him rest of season in fantasy rankings, where would you have a guy like Burnes, just given what we've seen to start the year?
I mean, I was not very high on him coming into the year for all the reasons you just mentioned. Like, we're kind of seeing... Like there are enough red flags to be concerned, right? Like we already have enough concerns about most pitchers coming into the year. I don't need extra ones. Like with some of like the kind of like declining performance. Last year was like the first year. Like there were points last year like he did not look dominant at all. He struck out less than a batter per inning. I still have him in my top 12 for now. I don't know. I just feel like I have to move him down. Just like based on like he still finished with like a 2.92 ERA last year. It's still really good. Still 181 strikeouts in 194 innings. But we've seen the K rate decline for what, 4 or 5 years now. And some of it, like it's not like kind of like a fluke thing. Like some of his other, like you mentioned, like velocity and other things are kind of on the decline too and have been for a while. So it doesn't seem like a temporary blip. It seems like a trend and something that, he's been really good despite it. He's kind of like, I don't know if you would call it like learn to pitch around it, but he's been adjusting, but another slow start. I think there are reasons to be concerned. He doesn't have that deep, super wall in Baltimore behind him anymore. Now he's out in the heat in Arizona. And I think there's a lot of reason to be worried.
Our next topic here, we talked a little bit last week because I had him as a pickup. It looks like the A's are shuffling their lineup around even more to make room for their top prospect, Nick Kurtz. Again, we talked about him as a pickup last week, but since the last time we've recorded, we've seen Brent Rooker playing in the outfield. Like somebody had to move to make room between DH first and then somebody going to the outfield, and it looks like the A's are setting things up to make that room for him. He's been awesome. I think that while we were recording last week, he hit another home run in the minors. First base is not the strongest position in fantasy this year. There are still some great names at the top. So, like, obviously, we're not talking about him in the level of, like, Vladdy, Harper, Olsen, Freeman, Alonso, Josh Naylor. Those are the top 6. At what point do I get to a name, and I'm going to keep reading names in ECR at the position, at what point do I get to a name where you think you would reasonably consider ranking Kurtz as soon as he gets called up in terms of rest of the season at first base? Because the next names after Naylor, Cody Bellinger, Salvador Perez, Christian Walker, Tristan Casas, Wilson Contreras, Jake Berger, Yainer Diaz, Vinny
Am I supposed to stop you, or are you just gonna?
I thought you were gonna stop me. You love to interrupt.
Tristan Casas, I would gladly have Nick Kurtz over Tristan Casas.
Because that puts him as 10th at his position. Now there might be other names that you think are too low and would move up. There's a lot of guys on this list who have multiple position eligibility too, like Berger and Paredes is eligible at third and Arias at second and stuff like that. But it sounds like you see him as a borderline top 10 first baseman as soon as he gets called up.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's an upside play. Like there is a lot of concern with what we've seen with young hitters coming up in the last few years where they, just look incredible in the minors and then come up and struggle in the majors. He looks the part, he's just destroying minor league pitching. And I think there's just a case to make where a lot of the players that you just mentioned, like we kind of like know what they are, or we can expect the production. Like Christian Walker, someone we'll talk about. He's off to a slow start, and like a Jake Berger also off to a slow start. Wilson Contreras, and then like there's hitters like Vinny Pasquantino where it's like we kind of like know what he is. Like he's a good hitter. Like I don't think there's a massive ceiling there. Nick Kurtz might have a massive ceiling, and so there's kind of like that mystery box element where you're like, I'll rank him aggressively just for the chance that he kind of breaks out and you get this huge power potential because like. If he looks half as good as he in the majors as he does in the minors, like we're talking about a league winner here. And so, I think you have to be aggressive on him just for the chance.
So what about some of the names that are further down the list that I didn't get to because they're still ranked probably a bit too low, but who are off to strong starts? Not the guys that we expected to be good and who are off to slow starts, but the reverse. Because guys who are ranked a lot lower, but who are playing well, Tyler Soderstrom, Spencer Torkelson, Michael Busch, Ben Rice. Where does he fit in amongst those guys? Would you rather make the upside swing with Kurtz, or would you rather just bump some of those guys way up who have had early steps of a possible breakout this year?
So Soderstrom is the name that jumps out that I already bumped him up to my top 10. So yeah. Soderstrom, I think, like I in some ways, based on the hot start, like we're hoping Nick Kurtz comes up and looks like Tyler Soderstrom. So
if he plays like Soderstrom, it's an A+ Grand Slam. Like that's a win.
Yeah. So in that case, like I don't want the mystery box. I want the boat. Soderstrom is probably the line there. Like Ben Rice, he's been a fun story. He plays in a great ballpark. I just hope that he continues to play every day. You never know with who's coming back to that Yankees lineup. They already have Goldschmidt at first base. So I worry about him losing playing time, especially against lefties. But, he's someone I picked up. We mentioned earlier the ESPN Fantasy League for FantasyPros that you and I are in. I picked him up there. He's my util for now. So happy with his production. But, yeah, there's a certain appeal of Nick Kurtz that, I think I'd rather have Kurtz than some of them. What were the other names? Torkelson,
Rice, Michael Busch had a good game a couple days ago. I think Soderstrom is the best of that group, like clearly.
Yeah, I think it would be Soderstrom, and then I'd probably rather have Kurtz than those other guys.
The other thing about Kurtz, by the way, he is an excellent, in the minors, so we'll see how it develops, but like his reputation as an excellent defensive first baseman. So once he is up, you would expect, like, even if his bat is taking some time to adjust, which we have seen in recent years, that the glove will keep him in the lineup every day. All right, last part.
Sorry. Speaking of, before we move on, like talking about Tyler Soderstrom, there have been some whispers that he could play some third base, which would be really good for fantasy if he got third base eligibility.
I would be really annoyed at myself for not picking him up in more leagues if he becomes third base eligible, because that third base is a black hole for me on every roster I have in fantasy this year. I did not go heavy. Well, I have Bregman in a couple places, which is fine. But outside of the leagues where I have Bregman, I do not have a good third baseman anywhere. Yeah. All right. So our last topic here in rounding the bases was going to be a different topic, and then you kind of backed out at the last second. You said you got a little too busy, and so you changed it up. We're going to look at some transactions from some of our synced league data on FantasyPros. So these are teams that have synced their leagues through my playbook on FantasyPros, and we can get information about some of the most added players, some of the most dropped players, and some of the most traded players. We'll start with the most added. At the top of the list, we have Bobby Miller. He's, number one on the list. I'm looking at some of the other pitchers here.
He's probably going to be one of the most dropped next week.
Yeah. Jose Quintana, Tyler Wormeli, Merrill Kelly, Jake Irvin, some of the pitchers on the list. Before we get to the hitters, from the pitcher standpoint, what do you make of those names?
Well, Bobby Miller was picked up because he made his debut for the Dodgers. It did not go well, and he's probably going back to the minors. The Dodgers have a bunch of injuries right now, but they also just have a gazillion pitchers, and so they're not going to have any time for struggles. I was really high on Bobby Miller a year or two ago, and it just I don't know what happened, but he's off the rails now. So he was picked up as a speculative ad, by a ton of people. I'm sure they're like, hey, here's a good young pitcher pitching on the Dodgers, and well, it didn't go well. So he's going to be one of the most dropped. Jose Quintana, off to a really strong start. Not striking out a ton of guys, but really good numbers, 2 strong starts. Other than that, Tyler Mahle is an interesting one. We talked about a little bit last week as a pitcher that we liked. There was actually a special on him on MLB Network this morning where they're kind of talking about how he doesn't have this elite fastball, but he has an elite fastball whiff rate right now. I would say almost an unsustainable fastball whiff rate right now. For a guy who doesn't have an electric fastball, he's just kind of doing it with smoke and mirrors. So I don't know how sustainable that is, even though he's a pitcher that I like and who's pitching really well right now.
Some of the hitters on the most added players list, a couple of Rays are first and second amongst the hitters, Jonathan Aranda and Cameron Meisner. Just keeping it to those two at first, who would you rather have between those two?
Probably Aranda, just for the the profile there. The thing that concerns me about like all Rays kind of in that tier in general is that like they have so many of these guys that the second one of these guys gets cold, they're just going to rotate another guy in and just piece it together. Like, and I know you like, is his name Chandler Simpson? Is that his first name?
Yes.
Yeah, down in the minors, they have like a few guys who could just come up at a moment's notice, and then like these guys are gone. So they're really kind of just, for me, I would think streaming options. I know Aranda has kind of been around for a while, and he's been like, when he's in the lineup, he doesn't really play against lefties, but when he's in the lineup against righties, he's betting cleanup, which is pretty nice. And the numbers are, very strong to start. Like he's not going to hit 400 all year, but he is right now.
Looking at the most dropped players list, Easton Lucas, who I believe we talked about on last week's episode as a possible pickup, or at least you talked about him as a possible pickup. He is now by far the most dropped player here.
Dagger.
Tanner Houck obviously is dropped a lot in our head-to-head points league that you and I are both in. The way the scoring works, he got negative 17 points in his start against the Rays, and I'm facing him, which was superb for me. That was a joy to watch. So he's number 2 most dropped. There's really 4 names that are like by far the most dropped. Lucas is number 1 by a mile, and then Houck, Matt Shaw is number 3, and Taijuan Walker is number 4. Of those 4, do you kind of agree with like the order of that, and are you very willing to drop all 4? I mean, obviously Shaw is not in the majors anymore, so that's an easy one. But for those 3 pitchers, like, are you very willing to drop those guys too?
I'm pretty willing to drop them. I wouldn't have Easton Lucas as the top to drop because he was pitching well before the start, and then he had like one bad start. Like Tanner Houck got obliterated, and maybe he's just not the most dropped because he wasn't on enough rosters. Whereas Easton Lucas was like, all right, here's a guy pitching pretty well. So now
Lucas is a guy like you pick somebody up because they're doing well and they have a terrible start. That's like, oh, if I'm going to drop somebody to make room for somebody, like that's a natural person to drop. So I get it with him.
Yeah, and he's like a streamer. Taijuan Walker, I'm a little interested that he's the most dropped. It must be like a lot of daily leagues just because he's a 2-star pitcher this week. So you would think he would be more on the added side. But he did just have a bad start, which is probably why he's now on the drop list.
Yeah. Obviously, Justin Steele dropped as well, out for the season. So a sad one. He's a fan of FantasyPros. We're a fan of his. So that's one we are sad to see get dropped. Some of the other names like Jeffrey Springs, Zach Fiend, Victor Scott, Spencer Steer. Anybody stand out to you? Jackson Holliday is getting dropped a lot. He just hit a grand slam yesterday, so maybe he's breaking out of
an
his
Oppo
slump.
grand slam too. Left center, I think.
Yeah, it was like I would call it more just like up the middle. It was technically oppo as opposed to a pull, but it wasn't like to left field. It was like definitely just left of center.
Yeah, I think Jeffrey Springs is an interesting one because he's a pitcher that I really liked coming into the year. Gotten off to kind of a shaky start, but I think the tiebreaker there in terms of like, keeping him and holding on to him is that ballpark because that ballpark is just home run central right now. So I kind of don't want a guy who's gotten off to a slow start and he's just going to be in that ballpark all season. And like, we're not even at April yet. Like if that's what's happening in April, like what's going to happen in July in that ballpark. So yeah, I kind of, I can see, I would probably try to like hold and trade Jeffrey Springs, but I get it. If you can't, you just have to drop him.
Number 1 most traded players, Marcus Semien. What do you think about that?
I get it. Another player with a slow start. It's possible. Like, is this it? Is this the end? I get it. Like that, you like the power speed potential, although the speed numbers have been down recently, recent years. But there are signs, he's kind of like never had like the best batted ball data, but he's been really good the last several years. But it just seemed like the last couple years, like maybe it wasn't a down year. Like maybe it's just like, he's not a young player and it's not going in the right direction here.
Other names on the most traded list, Christian Walker, we're going to talk about a little bit more in our next video. Kyron Paris, that makes sense. A guy who kind of comes out of nowhere and is playing amazingly well. Those guys are often good trade candidates. Corbin Burnes, we talked about already. Gunnar Henderson, I get actually just how slow his start has been, but, people are going to want to buy into the stud. Chris Sale, Casey Mize coming off his first not great start here of the season. Has been traded a lot. Bo Bichette, somebody that I really liked investing in in draft season. You get further down the list, Roki Sasaki, an interesting one. Jacob Wilson, an interesting one. Rafael Devers. Who stands out to you amongst kind of anybody really on the list?
Sale's an interesting one. He probably, a lot of these trade conversations started, a start or two ago when he was still kind of not looking great and people were seeing if they could buy low. Which I get. He's someone if I would be open to trading, but I'm also I'm always willing to buy low if you're trying to sell below market value. I'll take a swing and see if he turns it around. And so far, it seems like he's going to. Bo Bichette, I think is an interesting one, just because it seemed like heading into this season he was the hot name in the industry that everyone's he's gonna have a bounce back year. He's gonna be great. And he has gotten off to a pretty good start, but I do wonder it doesn't seem like he's gonna run anymore. And so I wonder how many of these fantasy managers are kind of can I cash in on this hot start? For this player who might be dare I say, a little overrated at the moment, even though I like Bo Bichette. But it's yeah, he's batting 305, but he also has no home runs and no steals. So it's kind of an empty 305 from a fantasy perspective. So I could see that being a sell high situation.
One player that I was actually surprised isn't on the list, and we'll wrap up after this, was Jung Hoo Lee of the Giants, who has been good. I mean, he's got 3 home runs and 3 stolen bases. His OPS is over 1,000. He's hitting .338. He's got 10 doubles on the season, just 12 strikeouts through 17 games. I mean, he's not a player that we've never heard of before, but I feel we haven't really talked about him really ever on this show. But he's been very good. I was kind of thinking we might see him on a most traded list, and we don't. Is he somebody that you would be looking to maybe consider selling high on, or would you buy high if you don't have him? Are you a believer in what he's done so far this year, or is he just more of a hold and ride the hot streak while you can?
Well, it's interesting that you bring it up because he's a name I looked pretty hard at this week when writing the buy low, sell high blurbs I had to write for the article. And I remember actually going from Marcus Simeon's page on StatCast to Jung Hoo Lee's page. And I was shocked with how much red is on Jung Hoo Lee's page. And so I was well, maybe he's not the biggest sell high. Maybe some of this is legit. I don't think it's legit looking enough that I'd be willing to buy high. But I think if you have him, there's some promising underlying very bright red data here that seems like some of it's legit. We'll see how long it lasts, but it's so far it doesn't seem overly fluky. It's obviously still an incredibly small sample size. And if you want to make me a really good offer, I'd probably sell high. But just a lot of times when I'm looking at the article, I'm looking for a sell high for kind of an obvious reason, whether it's injury concerns or I think these numbers are kind of fluky. Whereas him, I didn't end up picking him as my sell high just because it looked like some of the underlying data looked really good.
We'll wrap things up there. Be sure to check out the rest of the cycle. We'll be hitting to some buy low, sell highs, some waiver ads, and some pitcher stuff in a couple of episodes dropping on both video and audio over the rest of the weekend. For Maher, I'm Ryan Wormeli. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.